What happens when you try to humiliate a man who plays chess while everyone else is playing checkers? When Julian Thorne, the tech billionaire behind Titan Innovations, was cheated on by his wife Amelia, he didn't scream or break things. He simply signed the divorce papers and moved on. But 2 years later, Amelia decides the world needs to see her upgrade the very man she left Julian for. She orchestrates a confrontation at New York's most prestigious charity gala, planning to parade her new life in his face. She thought she was lighting a match to burn his pride. She didn't realize she was standing in a room soaked in gasoline, and Julian Thorne was holding the detonator. This isn't just a story of revenge, it's a masterclass in demolition. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't delivered by a standard courier, but by a specialized service that handled sensitive documents for Manhattan's elite, encased in a thick, cream-colored envelope made of pressed cotton. Julian Thorne's executive assistant, a ruthlessly efficient woman named Clara, placed it on his expansive obsidian desk with a pair of silver tongs as if it might be contaminated. "This came for you, Mr. Thorne, personally addressed," she said, her tone clipped. Julian didn't look up from the schematics of a new quantum computing processor he was reviewing. At 42, he possessed a stillness that many mistook for detachment. It was in reality the hyper-focused calm of a predator. His dark hair had the barest whisper of silver at the temples, and his eyes, a deep charcoal gray, missed nothing. He built his empire, Titan Innovations, from a garage startup into a global behemoth by anticipating every variable. It was a skill he applied to all aspects of his life. From whom Clara, Amelia Vance. The name hung in the sterile air of his 90th floor office. It wasn't her birth name, nor was it his. It was the name she had adopted after their divorce, a theatrical, old-money-sounding name she felt suited her new station. Vance. It sounded like a sigh of disappointment. Julian finally lifted his gaze. "Let me see it." The invitation was for the Children's Legacy Foundation Heritage Gala, the undisputed pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar. It was an event Julian was already a primary sponsor of. His personal invitation, the one that truly mattered, was already on the mantelpiece of his penthouse. This one was different. This was a message. Inside, nestled next to the formal invitation, was a handwritten note on matching stationery. The handwriting was Amelia's large looping letters that always seemed to take up more space than necessary. "Dearest Julian, I know it's been some time, but I truly hope you can make it to the Heritage Gala this year. Marcus and I have just joined the Junior Patrons Board, and we're so thrilled to be giving back. It would mean the world to me to see you there and properly catch up. We have so much wonderful news to share. Let's let bygones be bygones for old time's sake. Warmly, Amelia." Every word was a carefully polished stone thrown in his direction. Marcus. Marcus Cole, the man who had once been Julian's promising young mentee in Titan's R&D department. The man Julian had welcomed into his home. The man who had been sleeping with his wife for nearly a year before he found out. The wonderful news Julian knew from the society pages Amelia so desperately courted was that Marcus had launched his own tech firm, Innovatech, which had by some miracle secured a massive round of funding and was being lauded as the next big thing. Amelia was positioning herself as the glamorous muse behind the genius. Julian leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning softly. He remembered the day it all fell apart. Not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet click of a file opening. He'd been beta testing a new home security protocol that synced audio from all devices. He wasn't looking for anything, just running a diagnostic. But the system flagged a conversation from the guest house, Amelia's art studio. Her voice and Marcus's. They weren't talking about art. They were laughing about him. About how he was too busy, too sterile, too focused on changing the world to pay attention to the woman in his bed. They mocked his quiet intensity, his methodical nature, the very traits that had built the world they so comfortably inhabited. He didn't confront them. The next morning his lawyer served Amelia with divorce papers. The settlement was ironclad and brutally efficient. She got the Hamptons beach house, a generous alimony for 5 years, and a portfolio of investments. What she didn't get was a single share of Titan Innovations. She didn't get his name. She didn't get the satisfaction of a fight. He had simply excised her. Now, 2 years later, she was trying to crawl back into his orbit. Not as a contrite ex-wife, but as a victor. This invitation wasn't an olive branch. It was a gauntlet. She wanted to stand in the center of his world on a stage he had essentially paid for and show everyone that she had won. That her new man Marcus was his equal or even his superior. A slow smile touched Julian's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Clara," he said, his voice a low hum. "Please RSVP to Miss Vance. Let her know that Dr. Eris Thorne and I would be delighted to attend." Clara's eyebrow arched slightly. Dr. Eris Thorne, Julian's wife of 6 months, a brilliant pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon he had met at a medical technology conference. She was everything Amelia was not: genuine, intellectually curious, and utterly unimpressed by his wealth. She was impressed by his mind, his dedication, and the quiet kindness he showed his 10-year-old daughter, Lily. "And Clara," Julian added, picking up the schematic again, "get me Donovan on the line, and then reach out to our legal team. Tell them I want a full deep dive workup on a company called Innovatech. Financials, investor profiles, intellectual property filings. Everything. I want to know who funded them, how they operate, and what they had for breakfast this morning." The trap had not been set by Amelia. She had merely walked towards it. Julian Thorne was going to spring it. The 2 weeks leading up to the Heritage Gala were for Julian a period of quiet, intense activity. On the surface, his life was unchanged. He oversaw the final testing phase of Titan's new satellite network, had dinner with Eris and Lily every night, and helped his daughter with her impossibly complex Lego architecture sets. But beneath that placid surface, the gears were turning. His first call was to Donovan Gray, his head of security and corporate intelligence. Donovan was a former MI6 field agent who had retired to the far more lucrative world of private security. He was a ghost, a man who could procure information as easily as most people procured groceries. "Innovatech," Julian said, pacing his soundproofed home office, a glass of Japanese whiskey swirling in his hand. "Marcus Cole. I want the unvarnished truth, Donovan, not the press releases." "Already on it, Julian." Donovan's voice crackled through the secure line. "The public story is that he wowed a consortium of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. The early whispers are a little different. The funding came through fast. Too fast. From a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. Smells like one big investor trying to stay hidden." "Find him," Julian ordered. "I want a name." Meanwhile, his legal team, a pack of sharks from the prestigious firm of Cromwell and Swain, began dissecting Innovatech's patents. The lead lawyer, a man named Sterling, called Julian 2 days later, his voice tight with professional outrage. "It's brazen, Julian," Sterling said. "Their core product, a predictive analytics engine for supply chain management. The base code is a direct lift from your Helios project. It's been cosmetically altered, layered with some new UI, but the foundational architecture is yours. Cole must have taken it with him when he left." Julian felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Helios was a project he had personally spearheaded. He had brought Marcus into the inner circle, shared his vision, trusted him. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. It was theft. "Can you prove it?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Give us a week," Sterling replied. "We'll find a digital fingerprint he was too arrogant to scrub." His parallel track was with the organizers of the Heritage Gala. He had a quiet lunch with the Foundation's chairwoman, a formidable society matriarch named Beatrice Vanderbilt. Over sea bass and iced tea at a discreet corner table at La Grenouille, Julian laid out his request. "Beatrice, I'm increasing my donation this year," he began. "Significantly, I want to announce a new initiative under the Foundation's umbrella." Beatrice's eyes lit up. "Julian, that's marvelous. What did you have in mind?" "I'm establishing the Thorne Grant for Ethical Innovation. It will be an annual endowment to fund startups that demonstrate unimpeachable business practices and transparency. But for its inaugural year, I want to do something special. I want the grant to fund a complete independent and very public audit of a promising new company to certify them as a gold standard of ethical practice, a new benchmark for the industry. Beatrice was ecstatic. It was a brilliant PR move for the foundation. What a novel idea. It will generate so much positive press. Do you have a company in mind for the inaugural honor? Julian took a slow sip of water. I do. A young dynamic firm called Innovatech. He let the name hang in the air. Beatrice, who knew the story of his divorce, understood immediately. A slow, calculating smile spread across her face. She saw the drama, the delicious high society spectacle of it all. Julian saw the checkmate. He would not accuse Marcus of theft. He would not scream or cause a scene. He would offer Marcus the greatest honor of his young career on the biggest stage in front of everyone who mattered. He would offer him a golden chalice, and Marcus would have no choice but to drink from it, knowing full well it was filled with poison. To refuse the honor of a Thorne-funded audit would be an admission of guilt. To accept it would be to light the fuse on his own destruction. That evening, Eris found him staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse. The lights of Manhattan spread before him like a carpet of scattered diamonds. She came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head on his back. "You've been quiet these last few days," she said softly. "This gala, it's about Amelia, isn't it?" Julian turned in her embrace, his hands finding hers. "It is. But not in the way you might think. This isn't about anger, Eris. I'm not the man I was 2 years ago. This is about closing a door and ensuring the rot from that part of my life doesn't touch what I have now. With you. With Lily." Eris looked up at him, her intelligent eyes searching his. "You're going to do something, aren't you? Something calculated." "I'm going to give them exactly what they want," Julian said, a glint of steel in his eyes. "A spotlight. They just don't realize how hot it's going to be." She nodded, trusting him completely. She knew the man. He was not vengeful, but fiercely protective. He wasn't lashing out. He was performing a surgery, cutting out a cancer with cold, precise skill. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. The great hall, normally a cavern of echoing stone and quiet reverence, was now a glittering jewel box of human ambition. Crystal chandeliers brought in for the occasion cast a warm golden glow over the throngs of people dressed in their finest. The air hummed with the sound of champagne flutes clinking discreet laughter, and the murmur of billion-dollar deals being discussed under the guise of philanthropy. This was the Heritage Gala. Julian and Eris arrived with the understated elegance that was their signature. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, the kind of simple, perfect garment that cost more than most cars. Eris was breathtaking in a deep sapphire gown by Bottega Veneta that shimmered with every movement. She wore a single piece of jewelry, a delicate diamond necklace Julian had designed for her, its pattern mirroring the constellation that was in the sky the night they met. They didn't make an entrance. They simply appeared, and the gravity of the room subtly shifted toward them. They were greeted by Beatrice Vanderbilt, who gave Julian a look that was equal parts conspiratorial and thrilled. "Julian, Eris, you both look divine. We are so looking forward to your announcement later." They spent the first hour mingling. Julian was a master of these events. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, speaking with senators, tech rivals, and artists with the same focused attention. He was introducing Eris to his world, but it was clear to everyone that she was not an accessory. She was his partner, engaging a renowned physicist in a debate about string theory one moment and charming a notoriously gruff hedge fund manager the next. And then he saw them. Amelia and Marcus made their entrance as if a spotlight was following them. Amelia was poured into a garish, bright red gown covered in sequins that caught the light and fractured it in every direction. It was a dress that screamed, "Look at me!" Her blonde hair was coiffed into an elaborate updo, and heavy diamond earrings, clearly new, dangled from her ears. Beside her, Marcus Cole looked like a boy playing dress-up in his father's clothes. His tuxedo was a size too big in the shoulders, and he wore a smug, self-satisfied grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was trying to project power and confidence, but it came across as nervous arrogance. He kept touching Amelia, his hand on her back, her arm a constant performative display of possession. They began to work the room, but their path was deliberate, a slow, winding trajectory that was designed to end at one place in front of Julian Thorne. Julian watched them, his expression unreadable. He felt nothing, no anger, no jealousy, just the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. Eris squeezed his hand gently. "Don't let them ruin our night," she whispered. "They won't," Julian replied, his voice calm. "They are merely the evening's entertainment." Finally, the moment arrived. Amelia, with Marcus in tow, glided toward them, her face arranged in a mask of pleasant surprise. "Julian, I was so hoping we'd run into you," she gushed, her voice a little too loud. "You remember Marcus, of course." Marcus extended a hand, the oversized cuff of his shirt bunching at his wrist. "Thorne, good to see you." The use of his last name was a deliberate power play, an attempt to put them on equal footing. Julian ignored the outstretched hand and turned his full attention to Amelia. "Amelia, you're looking vibrant." He then turned to Marcus, his eyes doing a slow, deliberate scan from the ill-fitting suit to the nervous sweat on his brow. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Cole." The dismissal was as sharp as a slap. Marcus's hand dropped awkwardly to his side. Amelia's smile tightened. "And this must be your new wife," she said, her eyes sweeping over Eris with a critical gaze, undoubtedly cataloging the designer, the jewelry, the cost. "Dr. Thorne, is it? I read that you're a surgeon. How noble." The word was meant to be a condescending pat on the head. Eris met her gaze without flinching. "It has its moments. Saving children's lives tends to be more fulfilling than, say, chairing a committee on floral arrangements for a luncheon. But I'm sure that's rewarding in its own way." The retort was delivered with a pleasant smile, but it was a scalpel sharp and precise. A faint blush crept up Amelia's neck. She had expected a mousy academic, not a woman who could hold her own. "Well," Amelia chirped, trying to regain control, "Marcus has been doing incredible things. Simply incredible. Innovatic is the talk of the town. He's a true visionary. Aren't you, darling?" She beamed at Marcus, who puffed out his chest. "We've had a great year," Marcus said, directing his words at Julian. "Disrupting the old guard, proving that there's a new way to do things, faster, more agile." Every word was a veiled insult aimed at Julian's established old guard company. Julian listened patiently, his head tilted slightly, an expression of mild interest on his face. He let them talk, let them lay out their entire narrative of triumph and success. He wanted them to feel confident, to believe they were controlling the encounter. "That's fascinating, Cole," Julian said when Marcus finally ran out of steam. His tone was neutral, but there was a dangerous current beneath it. "Agility is important, but so is foundation. It's easy to build a house of cards quickly. It's much harder to build something that lasts." He then smiled, a genuine warm smile that was utterly disarming. "But please excuse us. Beatrice is signaling for us. I believe the evening's presentations are about to begin." He placed a hand on Eris's back and guided her away, leaving Amelia and Marcus standing in their wake. Amelia looked triumphant, convinced she had landed her blows. She believed she had shown Julian her new superior life and left him wanting. Marcus, however, looked uneasy. He had seen the look in Julian's eyes. It wasn't the look of a defeated man. It was the look of a grandmaster who saw the board 10 moves ahead and had just watched his opponent make a fatal, predictable error. The entertainment was over. The main event was about to begin. As Julian and Eris took their seats at the main table next to Beatrice Vanderbilt, and a smattering of the city's most influential figures, A palpable sense of anticipation filled the room. The dinner portion of the evening concluded and the lights dimmed slightly. The master of ceremonies, a well-known news anchor, took the stage to begin the presentation and fundraising portion of the night. From his vantage point, Julian had a clear view of Amelia and Marcus. They were seated at a prominent table near the front, a table Amelia had no doubt fought hard for. She was preening, whispering to the people on her left and right, occasionally casting what she thought were subtle glances back at Julian's table. She was basking in what she perceived as her victory. Donovan Gray, dressed impeccably as a member of the event staff, materialized behind Julian's chair. He leaned down, pretending to adjust a water glass. "We have it," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the MC's opening remarks. "The money trail for Innovatech leads back to one man, Alistair Finch." Julian's blood ran cold. Alistair Finch was his most bitter rival, a ruthless vulture capitalist who had been trying to undermine Titan Innovations for years. It all clicked into place, too. Finch hadn't invested in Marcus because he believed in him. He had invested in Marcus to get his hands on stolen Titan IP. Marcus wasn't a visionary. He was a Trojan horse. "And the legal team," Julian murmured back, his eyes fixed on the stage. "They found it," Donovan confirmed. "A fragment of redundant code buried deep in Innovatech's system. It's a unique sequence, an encryption signature Julian himself designed for the Helios project. It's his DNA on the murder weapon. Sterling says it's irrefutable." "Thank you, Donovan," Julian said, giving a slight nod. The final piece was in place. On stage, the MC was going through the usual thank yous. He acknowledged the various sponsors, the board members, and finally the evening's primary benefactor. "And now we'd like to invite to the stage a man whose generosity and vision have been the bedrock of this foundation for over a decade. He is a titan of industry, a true innovator, and one of this city's greatest philanthropists. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Julian Thorne." A polite, then thunderous round of applause filled the hall. Julian rose, gave Eris's hand a reassuring squeeze, and walked to the stage. He moved with an unhurried, commanding presence that drew every eye in the room. He adjusted the microphone, his calm gaze sweeping across the sea of expectant faces. He saw Amelia. She was watching him with a smug, condescending pity, as if expecting him to give a boring speech about corporate responsibility. "Thank you," Julian began, his voice resonating with quiet power. "It's an honor to be here tonight supporting the incredible work of the Children's Legacy Foundation. We often talk about building a better future for our children. We think of schools of medicine of opportunity, and all of that is vital." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But tonight I want to talk about the foundation upon which all of that is built. Integrity, honesty, ethical conduct. In my industry, in the world of technology, we move at the speed of light. We celebrate disruption, agility, and breaking the old rules. But sometimes in our rush to build the new, we forget the timeless principles that give our work meaning." He saw Marcus shift uncomfortably in his seat. Amelia's smile had faded slightly, replaced by a look of confusion. "That is why tonight I am proud to announce the formation of a new endowment, under the Foundation's care, the Thorne Grant for Ethical Innovation." A ripple of intrigued murmurs went through the audience. "This grant will not be a simple cash prize," Julian continued, his voice steady and deliberate. "It will be something more valuable. Each year we will select one new promising company that is making waves in its field, and we will fund a comprehensive top-to-bottom independent audit of their operations, their financials, and their intellectual property. The goal is to certify them with a Thorne Gold standard of ethical excellence, a seal of approval that will tell the world, their investors, and their customers that they built their success the right way. It is an honor we hope will become the most coveted in the tech industry." The applause was genuine, now enthusiastic. It was a brilliant, innovative idea. Beatrice was beaming. Julian held up a hand. "And for the inaugural year, we wanted to choose a company that embodies the spirit of youthful ambition and rapid innovation. A company that has shot onto the scene and captured the imagination of the market. It is my great pleasure to announce that the first ever recipient of this certifying honor, this gold standard audit, is Innovatech. He said the name and turned his gaze directly, unerringly, onto Marcus Cole. The spotlight operator, following prearranged instructions, swung the brilliant white beam from Julian and onto Marcus's table. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the only sounds in the great hall were the faint hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, silent thumping of Amelia Vance's heart. The spotlight was a physical weight, pinning her and Marcus to their chairs. Hundreds of faces, a gallery of New York's most powerful and influential, were turned toward them. Their expressions ranged from confusion to dawning comprehension to predatory curiosity. Marcus was frozen, his face a ghastly shade of white. The smug grin was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. His eyes were wide, darting from the blinding light to Julian on the stage, a cornered animal realizing the trap had just sprung. Amelia was the first to recover, though only just. Panic was a metallic taste in her mouth. This wasn't right. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. This was supposed to be her triumph. Julian was supposed to be the one squirming, the one left in the shadows. Instead, he stood on stage, a benevolent king bestowing a cursed crown upon them. On stage, Julian's expression was one of magnanimous encouragement. He was smiling. Marcus Cole, the brilliant founder of Innovatech, is here with us tonight, Julian announced, his voice booming through the speakers. Marcus, please stand up and be recognized. The MC, now understanding his role in this unfolding drama, began to applaud enthusiastically. Following his lead, the audience, sensing a spectacle, joined in. The sound was deafening. It was an ovation, but it felt like a judgment. Prodded by Amelia's frantic under-the-table nudge, Marcus staggered to his feet. He looked like a man being led to the gallows. He tried to smile, but it was a pained, grotesque grimace. This is a tremendous honor for a young company, Julian continued, his voice layered with feigned sincerity. A chance to prove to the world that their meteoric rise is built on a bedrock of integrity. The audit will be conducted by Deloitte and the intellectual property review by Cromwell and Swain's top patent lawyers, the best in the business. It will be rigorous, it will be transparent, and it will be public. When it is complete, Innovatech will be a paragon of corporate virtue. Every word was another nail in Marcus's coffin. Deloitte, Cromwell and Swain, public. Julian wasn't just exposing him, he was scheduling an autopsy and selling tickets to it. The trap was perfect. If Marcus accepted, the audit would uncover the stolen Helios Code and the shady funding from Alistair Finch. He would be ruined, exposed as a fraud and a thief. His company would collapse, and he'd be buried in lawsuits. If he refused, if he stood up in front of this assembly and turned down this incredible honor, it would be an immediate public admission of guilt. Why would any legitimate company refuse a free, prestigious certification that would send their valuation into the stratosphere? The questions would start immediately. The investors would get spooked. The press would smell blood. He would be ruined all the same, just faster. He had no move. Julian had cleared the board. Marcus, Julian said, his voice softening, becoming almost fatherly. It was a cruel, brilliant touch. I know we had our differences in the past, but I have always believed in spotting and nurturing talent. I consider this a way of offering my support to your new venture. Let's show the world how business should be done. What do you say? He had framed it as a personal olive branch, making it even more impossible to refuse. The spotlight was still on Marcus. The silence was still deafening. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Amelia, seeing her entire fantasy life crumbling before her eyes, did the only thing she could. She stood up, grabbed Marcus's arm, and plastered a brilliant, desperate smile on her face. She began to applaud, her claps sharp and loud in the silent room. "Thank you, Julian," she called out, her voice trembling slightly but full of forced cheer. "We are overwhelmed. We accept this incredible honor. Thank you." She pulled a stunned Marcus back down into his seat as the room erupted in a final, thunderous wave of applause. They were applauding Julian's generosity. They were applauding Marcus's success. but mostly they were applauding the blood sport they had just witnessed. On stage, Julian smiled graciously. "Excellent. I look forward to reading the results. Let's all give another round of applause for the future of ethical innovation, Innovatic." As he walked off the stage and back to his table, he passed a society columnist. He knew a shark named Brenda Carlyle. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. "Julian," she whispered, "I've seen executions more humane than that." Julian simply smiled, took his seat next to Eris, and picked up his wineglass. Eris looked at him, her expression unreadable. She took his hand under the table. His was steady as a rock. He had not raised his voice. He had not leveled a single accusation. He had simply told the truth, wrapped it in a bow, and called it a gift. Across the room, under the glare of the house lights that had now come back up, Amelia and Marcus were trapped at their table. People were coming over to congratulate them, their words dripping with insincere praise while their eyes danced with morbid curiosity. Amelia was holding her smile in place with sheer force of will while Marcus stared blankly ahead, seeing not a ballroom full of admirers, but the abyss that had just opened up beneath him. The party she had planned was in full swing. She was the center of attention. She was in the spotlight, and it was burning her alive. The immediate aftermath was a masterclass in social disintegration. As soon as the formal presentations concluded, a subtle but seismic shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. The invisible walls of social standing went up around Amelia and Marcus. People who had been eager to talk to them an hour before now found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. A potential investor who had been fawning over Marcus suddenly remembered a pressing call he had to take. A society dame who had been praising Amelia's dress now looked right through her. They were no longer the hot new power couple. They were a car crash in progress, and no one wanted to be caught in the wreckage. Reporters, on the other hand, descended like vultures. Brenda Carlyle was the first to reach their table, her digital recorder already on. "Marcus, Amelia, congratulations," she said, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "What an incredible vote of confidence from Julian Thorne. Were you surprised?" Marcus could only stammer, We're very grateful." "Of course. So you're not at all concerned about the public audit. Some might say that level of scrutiny on a new company is daunting. It implies you have absolutely nothing to hide." Her question was a beautifully crafted dagger. Amelia jumped in, her voice shrill. "Innovatech is an open book. Marcus is a genius, and we welcome the chance to prove it. This is just Julian's way of acknowledging the great work we're doing." But the desperation was plain to see. Her eyes were darting around the room, searching for an escape route. She saw Julian and Eris holding court at their table, surrounded by a circle of laughing, powerful people. They weren't even looking in her direction. They had moved on. The execution was over. They were now enjoying the party. That, more than anything, was the ultimate insult. They were already an afterthought. The escape was ignominious. They mumbled excuses about an early morning and practically fled the museum, a small coterie of journalists trailing them to the valet. The flash bulbs of the paparazzi felt less like a celebration and more like an interrogation. "Mr. Cole, are you worried your proprietary technology will be exposed by the audit?" "Miss Vance, is it true? Innovatic is funded by offshore accounts." "Is your company a house of cards, Mr. Cole?" They scrambled into their waiting car, the questions still being shouted at them as the doors closed. Inside the soundproofed interior of the Rolls-Royce, a lease, not a purchase, the silence was suffocating. Amelia finally rounded on Marcus, her carefully constructed facade shattering into a million pieces. "What did you do?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "An open book." "Are you insane? He knows, Julian knows everything." "How could he know?" Marcus babbled, sweat beading on his forehead. "The code was buried. The money was clean." "Nothing is clean to Julian Thorne," she shrieked, her hands flying to her hair, heedless of the expensive updo. "He has people. He can find out anything. You told me it was untraceable. You told me you were smarter than him. I am smarter than him, Marcus insisted weakly, but the words sounded hollow even to himself. He had believed it. He had believed his own hype fueled by Amelia's ambition and Alistair Finch's money. He had seen Julian as a slow, methodical dinosaur, and himself as the sleek, fast-moving mammal who would inherit the earth. He had forgotten that this particular dinosaur had built the park, set all the fences, and controlled the power. The drive back to their sterile, white-on-white Tribeca apartment was filled with bitter, panicked recriminations. The life they had built, a life funded by theft and hubris, was unraveling thread by thread. Meanwhile, back at the gala, Julian and Ares shared a quiet dance. The orchestra was playing a soft classic melody. Was that necessary? Ares asked, her head resting on his shoulder. Her question wasn't an accusation, but a genuine inquiry into his motives. Yes, Julian said simply, holding her close. When you find a cancer, you don't just watch it. You cut it out. Cleanly. Before it can spread. Marcus and Amelia, what they represent, it was a cancer. Greed, deceit, theft, disguised as ambition. It wasn't just about me, Ares. He stole from my company, from the thousands of people who work for me. He betrayed a trust, and she tried to use that betrayal as a weapon to hurt my family, my daughter, our peace. He looked down at her. There are lines you don't cross. They crossed them. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about quarantine. Ares nodded, understanding. It was the same logic she applied in her operating room. A diseased vessel had to be clamped and removed to save the heart. Later, as they were leaving, Julian received a text message. It was from Alistair Finch. It contained only 2 words, well played. The next morning, the news cycle was dominated by the story. Brenda Carlisle's column was brutal. Thorne delivers masterclass in public vivisection. The business journals were more measured, but no less devastating. They framed it as a bold, unprecedented move in corporate philanthropy. But the subtext was clear. Why Innovatech? What was Julian Thorne really up to? The phone calls to Innovatech started at 9:01 a.m. The first was from Alistair Finch's lawyers, officially pulling all funding and severing all ties, citing potential misrepresentation of proprietary assets. Without Finch's money, the company was insolvent. The second call was from Cromwell and Swain, formally notifying Marcus that the audit process, as accepted publicly by his associate Miss Vance, would begin the following Monday. They already had the court order to freeze all of Innovatech's digital assets. By noon, Marcus Cole's empire, which had seemed so bright and promising the day before, had ceased to exist. All that was left was the impending, very public autopsy. 3 weeks later, the world looked very different for everyone involved. The audit of Innovatech was a swift and brutal affair. As predicted, Cromwell and Swain's forensic tech team found Julian's digital fingerprint woven throughout the core of Marcus's predictive analytics engine. The theft was irrefutable. Simultaneously, Deloitte's accountants unraveled the web of shell corporations and discovered the funding from Alistair Finch, a fact that led to a separate SEC investigation into market manipulation. Titan Innovations filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against Marcus Cole for intellectual property theft. Alistair Finch, to distance himself, joined the suit, claiming he was a defrauded investor, effectively leaving Marcus to fight a war on 2 fronts with no allies and no resources. He was ruined professionally and personally. His name was toxic in the tech world. Amelia Vance's fate was in many ways more pathetic. Her name became a punchline in the society pages. She was the woman who threw her own public execution the ultimate Icarus, who flew too close to the sun on stolen wings. The invitations stopped coming. The friends who had flocked to her when she was with Marcus now ghosted her. Her alimony from Julian was set to run out in 3 years, and with Marcus's assets frozen, her lavish lifestyle evaporated overnight. She was forced to sell the jewelry sublet, the expensive apartment, and fade into the obscurity she had fought so desperately to escape. There was no grand downfall, just a quiet, humiliating slide into irrelevance. One crisp autumn Saturday, Julian was not in his office or a boardroom. He was on his hands and knees on the living room floor of his penthouse, helping Lily build a sprawling Lego city. Eris was curled on the couch reading a medical journal, a soft cashmere blanket draped over her legs. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The only sounds were the happy clicks of Lego bricks and the quiet turning of pages. Lily, her face a mask of concentration, held up a clear blue brick. "Dad, should the river go around the skyscraper or through the park?" "Good question, Chief Architect," Julian said, his tone serious. "A river through the park would be beautiful, but if we put it around the skyscraper, we can build a bridge and you have that new bridge set you wanted to use." "A bridge, yes," she said, her eyes lighting up. From the couch, Eris watched them, a soft smile on her face. This was the man she had married. Not the ruthless billionaire who could dismantle a rival without raising his voice, but the patient father who could spend an entire afternoon debating the urban planning of a plastic metropolis. She realized his actions at the gala weren't born from a place of coldness, but from a fierce protective warmth. He had built a fortress around this peaceful, happy Saturday afternoon. He had eliminated a threat to his family's tranquility with the same precision he used to design a circuit board, or as it turned out, help build a Lego bridge. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a news alert. Marcus Cole pleads guilty to wire fraud and IP theft as part of a settlement. Julian glanced at it, his expression unchanged. He swiped the notification away without a second thought. It was old news. It was a door he had already closed, locked, and soundproofed. He turned back to his daughter. "All right, Lilypad, let's build that bridge. We're going to make it the strongest bridge anyone has ever seen." He picked up a brick and clicked it into place. The quiet victory wasn't in the headlines or the courtrooms. It was here in the simple, unbreakable peace of his own home. He had built something that would last. 2 years passed. In the fast-paced world of technology and finance, 2 years can be an eternity. For Julian Thorne, it was a period of quiet growth and profound contentment. The Thorne Grant for Ethical Innovation, born from a moment of calculated warfare, had blossomed into one of the most respected accolades in the tech industry. Companies vied for the Thorne Gold Standard, and the annual gala was now a celebration of integrity, not a stage for personal drama. Titan innovations continued to break barriers, but Julian found himself delegating more, choosing instead to spend his evenings and weekends not in the boardroom, but in the peaceful sanctuary of his home. Lily was now 12, a bright, thoughtful preteen who had inherited her father's methodical mind and Iris's compassionate spirit. And Eris, the brilliant surgeon who had grounded his world, was now 6 months pregnant with their second child, a son. Their life was a tapestry woven with shared intellectual pursuits, easy laughter, and the gentle anticipation of a new beginning. The memory of Amelia and Marcus had faded, becoming a distant cautionary tale he no longer thought about. One Tuesday afternoon, Eris had a sudden craving for a specific type of cashmere baby blanket from a famously expensive children's boutique on Madison Avenue, a store named Le Petit Prince. Julian, eager to indulge her every whim, canceled his last meeting of the day and drove her there himself. The boutique was a hushed, elegant space filled with handcrafted wooden toys and racks of impossibly small, soft clothing. The air smelled of lavender and money. As Eris lovingly browsed the blankets, Julian wandered over to a display of silver rattles, smiling at the thought of a new baby's grip closing around one. "Can I help you find anything, sir?" The voice was familiar. A ghost from another lifetime. Julian turned slowly. Standing there, dressed in the store's simple but chic black uniform, was Amelia Vance. The 2 years had not been kind. Her vibrant blonde hair was now a more subdued, slightly brassy shade. The expensive, surgically enhanced tautness of her face had softened into a weary resignation. She was still beautiful, but the fire, the ambition that had once propelled her was gone. All that remained was the hollowed-out shell. Her eyes, which once flashed with defiance, were now carefully blank, the practiced, deferential gaze of a retail employee. She recognized him in the same instant he recognized her. For a split second, the professional mask slipped. He saw a flash of the old Amelia, a flicker of panic, humiliation, and bitter resentment. It was there and then gone, replaced by a forced, brittle smile. "Julian," she said, her voice a near whisper. What a surprise. "Amelia," he replied, his tone perfectly neutral. He felt no anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. He felt nothing. It was like finding an old, forgotten photograph of a house you used to live in. A flicker of recognition, but no emotional connection. Eris, hearing the exchange, walked over, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly. She placed her other hand on Julian's arm, a simple, supportive gesture. Amelia's eyes dropped to Eris's stomach, and for the first time a genuine emotion broke through her facade, a deep, painful envy that twisted her features for a fraction of a second. She had chased wealth and status and had ended up with neither. Eris had chosen partnership and love and was now standing here radiant, carrying the heir to an empire Amelia had tried and failed to possess. "We were just looking for a blanket," Eris said, her voice gentle but firm, creating a protective space around her and Julian. "Of course," Amelia said, her professionalism clicking back into place like a shield. "The cashmere is over here. It's our finest." She led them to the display, her movements stiff and rehearsed. She began to explain the different weaves and origins of the wool, her voice sounding thin and reedy in the quiet opulence of the shop. She was a curator in a museum of a life she could no longer access, forced to sell the trappings of wealth to women like Eris. "We'll take this one," Julian said, pointing to a soft cream-colored blanket, cutting her sales pitch short. He wanted the interaction to be over, not for his own sake, but for hers. The encounter felt cruel, and he had no desire to prolong it. Amelia took the blanket and walked to the counter, her back ramrod straight. As she carefully folded it and wrapped it in tissue paper, the silence was deafening. She didn't ask about his life. He didn't ask about hers. There was nothing left to say. The war was long over, and the victor had forgotten there had even been a battle. Julian paid with his card. The name Julian Thorne seemed to mock her from the small screen of the credit card machine. "Thank you for your purchase," she said, the words automated, lifeless. "Take care, Amelia," Julian said, not unkindly, and guided Eris toward the door. He didn't look back. As the little bell above the door chimed their departure, he felt Eris squeeze his hand. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He looked down at his brilliant wife, then put a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle kick of his son. He looked out at the bustling Madison Avenue, at the life and the future that was waiting for them. The encounter in the boutique already felt like a dream, distant and insignificant. "I've never been better," he said, and he meant it. He had won not at the gala 2 years ago, but in every quiet, happy moment since. His victory wasn't her defeat. It was his own peace. And in the silent, gilded cage of the boutique, surrounded by treasures she could touch but never own, Amelia Vance was left with nothing but the echo of a life she had so carelessly thrown away. In the end, this wasn't just a story about revenge. It was a lesson in the nature of true power. Amelia and Marcus believed power was about what you could show off: the flashy car, the expensive dress, the public declaration of success. Julian Thorne knew that real power is quiet. It's the intelligence to see 10 moves ahead, the strength to protect what you love, and the wisdom to know that the most devastating blow is often delivered with a smile and a helping hand. They wanted a spectacle, and he gave them one, proving that the brightest spotlights often cast the darkest, most revealing shadows. Karma, it turns out, is a billionaire with a plan. If you loved watching this story of calculated justice unfold, and if you believe that true victory lies in intelligence over arrogance, then please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who appreciates a well-played endgame, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories where the cunning and the deserving always come out on top. Click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story of drama and delicious karma. Thank you for listening.
The gavel fell its sharp crack, lost in the cavernous silence of the ornate courtroom. All eyes were on Thomas Braddock, a man whose expensive suit couldn't conceal the ugliness twisting his handsome features. He pointed a trembling manicured finger not at the opposing counsel, but at his own pregnant wife, Felicia. She was a mistake. He spat the venomous words echoing off the polished marble. A disastrous, regrettable mistake. And that thing she's carrying is a mistake I refuse to pay for. A wave of gasps rippled through the gallery. But the real drama wasn't in his calculated cruelty. It was in the worn, leather-bound folder the judge had just placed on his bench, a folder containing the last will and testament of the one man Thomas could never bully his late father. The air in courtroom 4B of the San Mateo County Superior Court was thick with the perfume of old money and fresh animosity. It was a sterile, impersonal space, all mahogany panels and muted grey carpeting, yet it had become the arena for the deeply personal evisceration of a marriage. Felicia Vale, soon to be she hoped, Felicia Vale once more sat ramrod straight in her cushioned chair. Her hands resting protectively over the pronounced swell of her stomach were the only part of her that betrayed the tremor running through her body. At 32, she still possessed the quiet, bookish beauty that had first caught Thomas Braddock's eye. Thoughtful grey eyes, a cascade of chestnut hair she'd simply pinned back, and a complexion that had never needed the heavy-handed ministrations of the Braddock family's preferred estheticians. Today, however, that beauty was shadowed by a weariness that went bone deep. She felt less like a person and more like a legal exhibit, the pregnant wife. Across the aisle, Thomas Braddock sat flanked by his lawyer, a shark in a Savile Row suit named Sterling, and his mother, Isabella Braddock. Thomas was the picture of wounded pride, his jaw tight, his brow furrowed in a performance of aggrieved masculinity. He was, Felicia had once thought, devastatingly handsome. Now she saw the weakness in his chin, the petulance in the downturn of his lips. He was a boy playing at being a king, and his mother Isabella was the silent, unyielding power behind the throne. Isabella Braddock was a masterpiece of preserved aristocracy. Her silver hair was coiffed into a helmet of glacial perfection. Her pearls were real, her Chanel suit was vintage, and her disdain was palpable. She hadn't looked at Felicia once, preferring to stare at the judge as if he were a tardy waiter. From the moment Thomas had brought Felicia home to the sprawling Braddock estate in Atherton, Isabella had treated her not as a future daughter-in-law, but as a hostile takeover bid. Felicia wasn't old money. Her father was a history professor, her mother a librarian. To the Braddocks, whose wealth stretched back to the railroad barons, Felicia was a curious little commoner, a temporary amusement for their heir. Mr. Braddock, Judge Albright, said, his voice a low gravel that commanded attention. He was a man in his 60s, with a weary face that had seen every flavor of human depravity. We are here to discuss the division of assets in your divorce proceedings. Let's try to maintain a certain level of decorum. Thomas's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client's emotional state is merely a reflection of the deep betrayal he has suffered. He entered into this marriage in good faith, only to find Felicia's lawyer, a kind but firm woman named Maria Davies, cut him off. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying. The betrayal Mr. Sterling refers to is my client's discovery that the prenuptial agreement Mr. Braddock forced upon her was not only unconscionable, but deliberately misleading. The prenup. The infamous document Isabella had presented to Felicia a week before the wedding. It had been an ambush styled as a casual chat over tea in the solarium. Just a formality, dear, Isabella had purred, sliding the thick document across the glass table. A way to keep things tidy. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings down the line. Thomas had backed his mother, of course. "It's just how things are done, Ellie," he'd said, avoiding her eyes. "It doesn't mean anything." It had meant everything. It had stipulated that in the event of a divorce, Felicia would walk away with nothing. Not a penny of the Braddock fortune, no claim to their properties, not even alimony. At the time, blinded by love and a naive belief in their future, she had signed it. Now, with a child on the way, a Braddock heir, the document was a cudgel they were using to beat her into submission. They offered her a one-time payout of $50,000 and a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive it would essentially erase her from their history. The validity of the prenuptial agreement is what we are here to debate. Judge Albright stated, his gaze fixed on Thomas. "But your personal feelings about your wife are for the moment irrelevant." This seemed to be the wrong thing to say. Thomas, who had been simmering, suddenly boiled over. He stood up, knocking his chair back slightly. "Irrelevant," he scoffed, his voice rising. "She is the most relevant mistake I've ever made. I was trapped. My father was ill, he was fond of her for some reason, and I went along with it." He gestured wildly towards Felicia. "She's a gold digger, Your Honor. A clever little parasite who saw a meal ticket and latched on." Maria Davies was on her feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous." But the judge simply raised a hand, silencing her. He was watching Thomas, his expression unreadable. And Thomas, emboldened by the attention, took a step forward. He locked eyes with Felicia, and the mask of the charming, carefree man she had married fell away completely, revealing the snarling, entitled creature beneath. "Do you know what she did?" He addressed the judge, but his words were daggers aimed at her heart. "She got pregnant on purpose. After I told her we should wait. After I told her things were not working out. She did it to trap me, to try and secure a piece of my family's legacy." Felicia felt the blood drain from her face. It was a lie. A vicious, calculated lie. They had been trying for a baby. It was Thomas who had been excited, who had talked about names, who had held her, and whispered dreams of their future family into her hair. That was before his father Arthur Braddock had passed away 2 months ago. Before Isabella had sunk her claws back into her son's soul. Then came the words that would be seared into her memory forever. Thomas's voice dropped, becoming low and guttural, dripping with a contempt so profound it physically hurt her. "She was a mistake," he repeated, pointing at her belly. "And that thing she's carrying is a mistake I refuse to pay for." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Felicia felt it like a physical blow. The baby inside her, their child, kicked as if in protest. Tears welled hot and fast, blurring the cruel face of the man she had loved. She saw Isabella smirk, a flicker of triumphant malice. This was what they wanted. To break her. To humiliate her so completely she would crawl away and accept their scraps. "That is enough." "Mr. Braddock." Judge Albright's voice was no longer weary. It was thunder. He slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing the shattering of Felicia's world. "That is more than enough. You will sit down now." Thomas, looking slightly stunned by his own outburst, sank back into his chair, though his hateful glare remained fixed on Felicia. Judge Albright surveyed the scene, his eyes lingering on Felicia's tear-streaked face, then on Isabella's smug one. He took a deep, steadying breath and squared a stack of papers on his bench. "This court is in recess for 15 minutes, he announced. However, before we break, a matter has been brought to my attention this morning by the executor of the late Arthur Braddock's estate." At the mention of his father, Thomas sat up straighter. A flicker of something confusion, perhaps apprehension, crossed his face. The judge picked up the worn, leather-bound folder. "It appears that Mr. Arthur Braddock's final will and testament, executed 1 month prior to his death, contains certain stipulations that have a direct and material bearing on the assets currently under discussion in this divorce. With the executor's permission, and given its relevance, I am unsealing it now." He opened the folder. The silence in the courtroom returned, but this time it was different. It was thick with confusion and a dawning electric tension. A will, Arthur's will, had been read weeks ago. It was simple, leaving everything to his only son Thomas, with a generous trust for Isabella. What was this? Felicia wiped her tears, her heart pounding a strange new rhythm. Arthur. Kind, gentle Arthur. He had been the only Braddock who had ever truly seen her, the only one who had ever been on her side. In his final months, as his illness worsened, he would often ask her to sit with him in the garden, away from the oppressive gloom of the mansion and the even more oppressive presence of his wife. They would talk for hours about history, about books, about her dreams for the future. He seemed to understand her in a way Thomas never had. "What is the meaning of this, Your Honor?" Mr. Sterling asked, his composure ruffled for the first time. "A new will." "We were not informed," it would seem Mr. Sterling, the judge, said, peering over his spectacles at the document, that no one was. Arthur Braddock was a very thorough man. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room, and began to read. As Judge Albright's voice began to drone through the legalese of the will's preamble, Felicia's mind spun backwards, away from the sterile cruelty of the courtroom to the sun-dappled lawns of the Braddock estate. She remembered the first time she'd met Arthur Braddock. It was 1.5 years ago. Thomas had brought her to the family's annual summer gala, a lavish affair of champagne fountains and string quartets. She'd been terrified, a simple librarian's daughter adrift in a sea of couture and condescension. Isabella had introduced her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her tone making Felicia Vale sound like a quaint, unlisted company. Felicia had escaped to the rose garden, overwhelmed when she found a man in a tweed jacket, his back to her, carefully pruning a climbing rose. He turned, and his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, held a warmth that was entirely absent from the main party. This was Arthur Braddock. "Ah, you've found my hiding spot," he'd said with a gentle smile. "Don't worry, I won't tell if you don't." They talked for nearly an hour. He didn't ask about her family's money or connections. He asked what she was reading. He asked about her work at the San Francisco Public Library, his face lighting up when she described her passion for historical archives. He spoke of his own love for history, a passion he lamented his son did not share. "Thomas sees history as a list of assets acquired," Arthur had said, with a sad, knowing sigh. "He sees the names Rockefeller, Carnegie, Braddock. But he doesn't understand the stories, the humanity." In that single conversation, Arthur had shown her more genuine interest and kindness than Isabella had in 6 months of strained dinners. He saw her not as an attachment to his son, but as a person. Over the next year, he became her quiet ally in the gilded cage of the Braddock family. While Isabella laid subtle traps and Thomas grew more distant under his mother's influence, Arthur would seek Felicia out. He'd leave a rare first-edition book on her bedside table or invite her to walk the grounds, sharing stories of the family that were not about wealth, but about love, loss, and folly. He was already ill then, a creeping lung disease that stole his breath but never his sharp intellect. As his condition worsened, the dynamic in the house shifted. Isabella became more controlling, treating her husband's illness as an inconvenience and tightening her grip on Thomas. The pregnancy had been a brief, shining moment of hope. Thomas had been ecstatic at first. It was his idea, a way to, as he'd put it, finally start our own family away from all the pressure. They'd celebrated with a trip to Big Sur, away from the oppressive atmosphere of the estate. He had put his hands on her still flat stomach and spoken of a future that felt real and full of love. The moment they returned, Isabella shattered it. Felicia overheard the argument from the top of the grand staircase. A baby. Isabella's voice was like ice. "Now, Thomas, you are an imbecile. You have no idea what you've done." "Mother, it's my child. Our child. I love Ellie." "Love," she'd scoffed. "You are infatuated with a librarian, Thomas, a nobody. And now she has tethered herself to our legacy with the oldest trick in the book. Do you think for 1 second she wasn't planning this? To tie you down, to make herself indispensable." The poison took root quickly. Thomas began to pull away. He started spending more time at the office, coming home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and another woman's perfume. The excuses were flimsy, the apologies hollow. He grew short-tempered, echoing his mother's criticisms. He'd comment on Felicia's clothes, her friends, her lack of ambition. Then Arthur's health took a steep decline. In his last weeks, he was confined to his bed. The house was somber and quiet. Isabella managed his care with ruthless efficiency, keeping visitors to a minimum. But Arthur would still ask for Felicia. One afternoon, just a month before he died, he beckoned her close. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were lucid. "Felicia," he rasped, taking her hand. His own was frail, all paper-thin skin and bone. "Don't let them break you. You have more strength than any of them." He'd looked pointedly at her stomach. "And you have a responsibility to that child, a responsibility to be strong." He'd made her promise. She hadn't understood the full weight of his words then. 2 weeks later, he summoned his personal attorney, a man Felicia had never met, to the house. Isabella had been furious, trying to insist that the family lawyer, Mr. Sterling, be present. Arthur, with a surprising burst of strength, had refused. "This is a private matter, Isabella," he'd said. The meeting had lasted for 3 hours. The next day Arthur seemed more at peace. He passed away in his sleep a month later. The first reading of the will had been exactly what everyone expected. A simple document leaving Braddock Enterprises and the bulk of the estate to Thomas. Isabella was granted a lifelong right to live in the family mansion and a generous stipend from a separate trust. It was so straightforward that Thomas had smirked a look of vindicated relief on his face. With his father gone, the final obstacle to his absolute inheritance and Isabella's absolute influence was removed. 2 days after that, Thomas had asked for a divorce. The words were cold, rehearsed. He'd said the marriage was a mistake, that he'd been pressured by his father's failing health. He presented it as a clean break, a return to the natural order of things. When Felicia, heartbroken and 7 months pregnant, had refused to be discarded so easily, he had turned vicious. The battle over the prenup began, and now here they were. A sharp intake of breath from Mr. Sterling snapped Felicia back to the present. Judge Albright had finished with the preliminary sections of the will. His eyes scanned the room before continuing. We now come to Article 4. The judge said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing every ounce of attention in the room. Regarding the disposition of my primary asset, my controlling interest in Braddock Enterprises Incorporated. Thomas leaned forward, a smug look returning to his face. This was it, the confirmation of his kingdom. I, Arthur Braddock, the judge read his voice, clear and deliberate, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare the following. My son Thomas Braddock has in recent months shown a lamentable lack of judgment and a character ill-suited to the stewardship of the company my grandfather built. A jolt went through the room. Thomas's face went from smug to slack-jawed shock. Isabella's carefully constructed composure cracked her mouth, falling open slightly. What Thomas whispered the word stolen by the cavernous room. The judge continued, his voice unwavering. He has proven himself to be easily manipulated and has forgotten the most fundamental principle of our family's success, that our name is built on integrity, not just on assets. Therefore, I cannot in good conscience deliver the future of Braddock Enterprises into his hands. This is insane, Sterling blurted out, rising to his feet. Your Honor, my client's father was clearly not of sound mind. He was heavily medicated. He was certified of sound mind by 2 independent physicians the day this will was signed, Mr. Sterling. Their affidavits are attached, Judge Albright said coolly, not even looking up. Now sit down. Sterling sank back into his chair, his face pale. The judge's eyes found Felicia's across the room. She held his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. He went on. Therefore, I hereby bequeath my entire controlling share of Braddock Enterprises, representing 51% of the voting stock, not to my son, but to a trust. This trust shall be known as the Arthur Vale Braddock Legacy Trust. Vale. He had used her maiden name. A low guttural sound escaped Isabella's throat. The judge continued reading the clause that would change everything. The sole beneficiary of this trust is to be my first-born grandchild, the child currently carried by my daughter-in-law, Felicia Vale Braddock. The courtroom devolved into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Thomas looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He stared at Felicia's belly, not with contempt, but with a dawning, horrified awe. That mistake was now the majority shareholder of his entire inheritance. But Arthur Braddock wasn't finished. The final killing blow was yet to come. Judge Albright looked up from the document, his gaze passing over Thomas and Isabella, before settling once more on Felicia. He read the last sentence of the article, his voice ringing with a profound posthumous finality. The sole executor and trustee of this trust vested with absolute and unconditional authority over all voting rights, board appointments, and financial decisions of Braddock Enterprises, until the beneficiary reaches the age of 25, shall be the child's mother, and my trusted daughter-in-law, Felicia Vale Braddock. For a long moment, the world stopped. The frantic whispers died. The rustling of papers ceased. The only sound in courtroom 4B was the frantic, trapped beat of Felicia's own heart. She stared at Judge Albright, certain she had misheard, that the grief and stress had finally caused her to hallucinate. Sole executor and trustee. Absolute and unconditional authority. The words didn't compute. They were abstract alien concepts that didn't belong to her. Felicia Vale, the librarian, the spurned wife, the humiliated mother-to-be. Then the spell broke. A strangled cry tore from Isabella Braddock's throat. It was a sound of pure, undiluted fury, the cry of a queen who has just watched her castle crumble into dust. "No, it's a lie, a forgery!" she shrieked, lurching to her feet. Her mask of aristocratic control was gone, replaced by a visage of raw, twitching rage. That woman, that scheming little harlot, she manipulated him. She poisoned my husband against his own family. Mr. Sterling, his face the color of ash, tried to restrain her, whispering urgently, "Isabella not here. Control yourself." But she was beyond control. She pointed a trembling, diamond-clad finger at Felicia. This was your plan all along. You seduced a dying old man, twisted his mind." "Mrs. Braddock." Judge Albright's voice cracked like a whip. "You are on the verge of being held in contempt. Another outburst like that, and you will be removed by the bailiff." Isabella snapped her mouth shut, but her chest heaved, and her eyes fixed on Felicia promised retribution. Thomas was eerily silent. He sat frozen, his body rigid, his eyes wide and vacant. He was staring at the polished table in front of him, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing his entire world, the one he had been promised from birth, vanish before his eyes. The kingdom he was meant to inherit, the power he was meant to wield, had just been handed lock, stock, and barrel to the woman he had publicly disavowed, and the unborn child he had branded a mistake. Felicia's lawyer, Maria Davies, leaned over her, voice a low, steady murmur in Felicia's ear. "Felicia, did you hear that? Do you understand what this means?" Felicia could only shake her head slowly, her mind a whirlwind of shock. She looked from Thomas's shattered expression to Isabella's murderous glare. She felt a kick, a strong, solid thump from within, a reminder of the tiny, unknowing beneficiary at the center of this cataclysm. Judge Albright, seemingly unfazed by the eruption, continued as if reading a grocery list. "The will goes on to state," he said, his voice cutting through the residual tension, "that Thomas Braddock is to be granted a salaried position as President of Operations, reporting directly to the Board of Directors. A board that the new trustee," he paused, looking directly at Felicia, "has the sole authority to appoint or dismiss." The implication was brutally clear. Thomas was no longer the heir apparent. He was an employee who could be fired. By her. Furthermore, the judge added, "The will stipulates that Thomas Braddock and Isabella Braddock are permitted to maintain residence in the Atherton family home, but only with the express ongoing permission of the trustee. The deed and title of the property are to be transferred to the Arthur Vale Braddock Legacy Trust." They were tenants in their own home. Their right to live there was now entirely at Felicia's discretion. The finality of it was absolute. Arthur hadn't just disinherited his son. He had orchestrated a complete coup d'etat from beyond the grave. He had seen the cruelty, the weakness, the greed, and he had built a fortress to protect his grandchild and the woman he believed could safeguard his legacy. He hadn't just given Felicia a shield, he had given her a sword, an arsenal, an entire kingdom. The will Judge Albright concluded, closing the leather folder with a soft thud, "is accompanied by a signed and notarized letter from Arthur Braddock detailing his reasons. It explains his concerns over his son's profligate spending, his susceptibility to his mother's corrosive influence, and his cruel and dishonorable treatment of his pregnant wife. The letter states, and I quote, "I have observed Felicia for 2 years. She possesses an integrity my son sorely lacks. She is intelligent, compassionate, and her loyalty is not to money but to family. I do not give her this power to punish my son, but to protect my grandchild. I trust her to do what is right." The judge looked at Thomas. "The letter also expresses hope, Mr. Braddock, that this drastic but necessary action will provide you with an opportunity to rediscover the man you were meant to be, not the man your mother wants you to be." That last line was a dagger meant for Isabella, and it hit its mark. She flinched as if struck. Judge Albright removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Given these revelations," he stated, his voice returning to its official, dispassionate tone, "the financial landscape of this divorce has been fundamentally altered. The prenuptial agreement is now entirely moot, as the primary assets Mr. Braddock believed were his to protect are in fact not his. The $50,000 settlement offered to Mrs. Braddock is, to put it mildly, insufficient." He looked at Felicia, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something almost like a smile in his tired eyes. "In fact, Mrs. Braddock is now, for all intents and purposes, the single most powerful financial entity in this room. The assets belong to the trust she controls." He turned to the stunned lawyers. "I am dissolving these proceedings for today. I suggest you all go home, absorb the contents of this will, and reschedule when you have a more realistic grasp of your clients' respective situations. Mr. Sterling," he added pointedly, "you may want to advise your client that his wife's mistake now controls his salary, his home, and his future. A bit of humility might be in order." With a final sharp rap of the gavel, he declared, "Court is adjourned." The judge rose and swept out of the room, leaving a vortex of stunned silence in his wake. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, chaos erupted. Reporters who had been lurking in the gallery rushed towards the doors. Sterling was frantically trying to speak to Thomas, who was still catatonic. Maria Davies was patting Felicia's shoulder, her face a mixture of shock and elation. Felicia slowly got to her feet, her legs unsteady. She felt dizzy, disconnected from her own body. Isabella was the first to move towards her, her face a terrifying mask of fury. She stalked across the aisle, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. "You will not get away with this," Isabella hissed, her voice low and venomous, close enough for Felicia to smell her cloyingly expensive perfume. "I will fight this. I will prove you are an unfit mother. I will drag your name through so much mud you'll drown in it. That baby will never see a penny." Before Felicia could react, a figure stepped between them. It was Thomas. His face was ashen, his eyes wild with a desperate, frantic energy. He looked from his mother to Felicia, then back again. "Mother, stop," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just stop." He then turned to Felicia. The contempt was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading panic. The man who not 20 minutes ago had called her and their child a mistake now looked at her as if she were a lifeline. "Ellie," he began, his voice cracking. He even reached a hand out as if to touch her arm before letting it fall. "Ellie, I didn't mean it. You have to believe me. I was angry. I was pressured." His eyes flickered towards his mother. "We can fix this, you and me. We can stop the divorce. We can raise the baby together, in our house." The audacity of it was breathtaking. The whiplash of his transformation from tyrant to supplicant was so sudden it was nauseating. He wasn't apologizing for the cruelty. He was trying to reverse a transaction that had gone horribly wrong for him. He didn't see a wife he had wounded. He saw the new CEO of his life. Felicia looked at his desperate, pleading face. She looked at Isabella, who was watching them with narrowed, calculating eyes, her mind already plotting new strategies. And she felt nothing. Not love, not hate, Not even anger anymore. Just a profound, chilling emptiness where her love for him used to be. She looked at his outstretched, trembling hand. Then she looked him directly in the eye, her own gaze clear and steady for the first time that day. Without a word, she turned and walked away, leaving her husband and his mother standing in the ruins of their fallen kingdom. Her lawyer Maria rushed to her side, and together they walked out of the courtroom. Not towards a miserable, uncertain future, but towards an empire Felicia had never asked for, but now, by the grace of a good man's final act, commanded. The days that followed the courtroom bombshell were a blur of surreal adjustments. Felicia didn't return to the small rented apartment she had secured as a refuge from her marriage. Maria Davies had insisted it wasn't secure enough. "You're not just a private citizen anymore, Felicia," she'd said, her tone urgent. "You are the head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. There are protocols now." And so Felicia found herself in a gilded prison of a different sort, a penthouse suite at the Four Seasons paid for by the Arthur Vale Braddock Legacy Trust, with a round-the-clock security detail stationed in the hallway, lawyers, trust officers, and financial advisors. Men and women with sharp suits and even sharper minds. All remnants of Arthur's loyal inner circle paraded through her living room. They presented her with binders thick with financial reports, organizational charts, and legal obligations. They used terms like fiduciary duty, hostile takeover defenses, and quarterly earnings projections. At first, it was overwhelmingly intimidating. She was Felicia Vale, who found comfort in the Dewey Decimal System, not the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But as they spoke, she listened. She asked questions, simple ones at first, then more complex ones. And she discovered something surprising. The logic of it, the intricate web of cause and effect, wasn't so different from tracing historical events or archival records. It was a story just told in the language of numbers. More importantly, she was fueled by a powerful clarifying force, the memory of Arthur's words, "I trust her to do what is right," and the visceral, soul-crushing memory of Thomas's "that thing she's carrying is a mistake." One was a sacred trust, the other a declaration of war. She would honor the former by prevailing in the latter. Her phone rang incessantly. The calls were from Thomas. He left dozens of voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. They were a pathetic symphony of panicked apologies and self-serving promises. "Ellie, baby, please pick up. I'm so sorry. I've been such a fool. My mother, she gets in my head. But that's over now, I swear. I was just looking at the crib we ordered. Remember the one from that little shop in Carmel? It's all about us, Ellie. You, me, and our little boy. Or girl. It's all that matters. I told Sterling to fire his legal team. We don't need lawyers. We're a family. Just come home. Please, just come home, and we can figure this all out." She never answered. She never listened to a single message, twice. It was the desperate pleading of a man who had lost his wallet, not a husband who had broken his wife's heart. Isabella, for her part, had gone to ground. But it was a tactical silence, not a surrender. Maria's legal team reported that Isabella had hired a new, notoriously aggressive law firm, specializing in contesting wills. They were digging, searching for any doctor who would testify to Arthur's incompetence, any nurse who would claim Felicia had restricted access to him, any scrap of dirt they could find, to paint her as a manipulative usurper. A week after the hearing, Felicia knew she couldn't stay in the hotel forever. She had to make a move. The trust owned the Braddock mansion. It was her house now. More importantly, it was her child's house. Arthur had not intended for his grandchild to be raised in exile. So she made a decision. She called Maria. "I'm going home," she said, her voice firm. "Felicia is that wise. It's not about wisdom, Maria. It's about a clear message. The Queen is not in hiding." The return was as dramatic as she had intended. She didn't sneak in the back door. She arrived in a black town car, arranged by the trust which swept up the long gravel driveway to the imposing facade of the Atherton mansion. As she stepped out of the car, the heavy front doors opened. Thomas stood there, his face a mixture of hope and terror. He had clearly been watching for her. He was dressed down in a cashmere sweater, an attempt to look soft, approachable. "Ellie." He breathed a relieved smile touching his lips. "You're home." "I am," Felicia said, her tone cool and level. She walked past him into the cavernous marble-floored foyer. The air was still and smelled of lemon polish and lilies, just as it always had. "I've asked a moving company to clear out my old things from the guest wing. They will be delivering my new furniture for the nursery this afternoon." Thomas's smile faltered. "Of course, anything you want. I had Mrs. Albright air out the master suite for you. For us." Felicia stopped and turned to him. "Let's be very clear, Thomas. I am not here to reconcile. I am here because this is my home now. It belongs to the trust that I command. You and your mother are living here at my discretion." The words hung in the air, cold and hard. The color drained from Thomas's face. "My legal team," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, "will be drawing up a tenancy-at-will agreement for you and Isabella. It will stipulate the terms of your continued residence. Furthermore, I am calling a board meeting for Braddock Enterprises for Monday morning. As President of Operations, your attendance will be required. You'll be expected to present a full report on the company's current standing." She was no longer his wife. She was his landlord and his boss. The reality of it slammed into him, and his composure finally shattered. "Felicia, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. Don't be like this. This isn't you. You're not this cold." "You're right," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "The woman I was would have forgiven you. She would have believed your lies and let you hurt her again. But you and your mother killed that woman. You stood in a court of law, and you killed her. So you'll have to get used to the woman who is left." Just then a sharp, imperious voice echoed from the top of the grand staircase. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Isabella stood there, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, her face a thunderous mask. Felicia didn't even grant her a full glance. "Hello, Isabella," she said, her voice carrying easily in the grand space. "I'm home. I trust your new lawyers have explained the situation to you. You're a guest here. Try not to forget it." She turned and began to walk towards the east wing, where Arthur's private study was located. It had been her sanctuary with him, and it would now be her command center. "You will regret this," Isabella shrieked from the landing. "I will see you on the street." Felicia paused, her back still to them. "No, you won't," she said without turning around. "You will see me in the boardroom, Monday at 9 a.m. Don't be late." And with that, she walked away, leaving mother and son standing in the opulent foyer of a house that was no longer theirs, silenced by the quiet, unshakable authority of the woman they had tried and failed to destroy. The following months were a masterclass in trench warfare, fought not with bullets, but with board appointments and legal briefs. Felicia, now 8 and then 9 months pregnant, moved not with the timid uncertainty of a librarian, but with the deliberate, focused strategy of a general. Arthur's study became her war room. Its rich leather-bound books on military history and corporate biography now seemed less like a collection and more like a curated library of tactics left for her by a brilliant mentor. Her first move was the board meeting. She walked into the Braddock Enterprises boardroom, a long, intimidating chamber dominated by a colossal mahogany table and portraits of stern-faced Braddock men, and every head turned. The existing board members, all cronies of Thomas and Isabella, looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and thinly veiled contempt. Thomas sat at the head of the table, a place he had occupied for less than 3 months. Felicia, guided by Maria, and the Trust's chief counsel took the seat directly opposite him. She didn't claim his chair. She created a new center of power. She let Thomas run through his report, a rambling, jargon-filled presentation clearly designed to intimidate and confuse her. When he finished, he looked at her, a challenge in his eyes. Felicia didn't respond directly to his report. Instead, she introduced the Trust's counsel, who then calmly and methodically laid out the legal reality of the new ownership structure. Then Felicia spoke. "Thank you, Thomas, for that overview," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "In my capacity as trustee, my primary duty is to ensure the long-term health and integrity of this company for the sole beneficiary. To that end, I have spent the last week reviewing the company's performance, its leadership and its vision, and I have found it lacking." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Effective immediately, I am exercising my authority as trustee to reconstitute the board of directors. Mr. Henderson, Ms. Albright, Mr. Chen," she said, naming 3 of Isabella's oldest and most loyal allies. "Your positions on this board are terminated. Thank you for your service." The 3 of them stared aghast. "You can't do that," one of them sputtered. "She can, and she has," the Trust's lawyer interjected smoothly. Felicia continued, her gaze sweeping the table. "In their place, I am appointing 3 new members. First, Ms. Maria Davies, whose legal expertise will be invaluable. Second, Mr. Alistair Finch." She named Arthur's longtime, fiercely loyal financial advisor, a man Isabella had forced into retirement. And third, Dr. Lena Petrova, a leading expert in sustainable business ethics from Stanford University. Arthur Braddock often spoke of creating a legacy, not just a profit margin. We will honor that vision. It was a coup. Clean, swift, and utterly devastating. She had decapitated Isabella's power base within the company in less than 5 minutes. Thomas sat impotent, watching his allies pack their briefcases in stunned silence. He was still president, but he was now a president who answered to a board that was loyal to her. Life in the mansion was a silent, cold war. Felicia took over the master wing, while Thomas and Isabella were confined to the guest suites. They shared the same roof, passed each other in the long hallways like ghosts, and ate meals at different times to avoid contact. Isabella's attempts at psychological warfare, leaving old happy photos of her and Thomas out making loud, pitying phone calls about poor, confused Felicia, were met with a wall of serene, impenetrable silence. Thomas, meanwhile, swung wildly between pathetic attempts at reconciliation and sullen resentment. He'd leave a single rose on her desk one day, and the next he'd make a sarcastic comment about her playing CEO at the dinner table. Felicia ignored it all. Her focus was singular, the baby and the business. She found an unexpected strength in the routine. She'd wake early, walk the gardens as she had with Arthur, and then spend hours with Alistair Finch, the reappointed advisor. He would patiently walk her through balance sheets and investment portfolios, marveling at her quick grasp of complex ideas. "Your father-in-law was right about you," he said one afternoon. You have a formidable mind, Mrs. Braddock. You see the whole chessboard. The one front where Isabella believed she could still win was the legal challenge to the will. Her lawyers filed motion after motion, claiming undue influence and testamentary incapacity. They deposed nurses, gardeners, and cooks, searching for any hint that Felicia had manipulated a dying man. The case was set to be heard by Judge Albright once again. Isabella was confident. She believed, found a star witness, a disgruntled former nurse, whom Isabella had paid handsomely to testify that Felicia had constantly bad-mouthed Thomas and Isabella to Arthur, poisoning his mind in his final days. The day before the hearing, Felicia was in the nursery putting the finishing touches on the room. It was painted a soft, gentle yellow, with a mural of a forest scene on one wall. As she stood there, her hands on her huge belly, feeling the strong, steady kicks of her child, she felt a profound sense of peace. She was ready for whatever came next. That evening, a courier delivered a small sealed package to her. It was from Arthur's personal attorney, the executor of the estate. The accompanying note was brief. Arthur asked me to give this to you if Isabella ever formally contested the will. He called it insurance. Felicia's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was not a document, but a small, solid-state audio recorder and a single key. Confused, she pressed play. The voice that filled the silent room was Arthur's. It was weak, raspy, clearly recorded in his last weeks, but it was unmistakably him. "If you are hearing this, Felicia," the recording began, "it means Isabella is trying to undo my final wishes. I am not surprised. Her greed has always been her most defining trait. I want you and the court to know the truth." Arthur's recorded voice then detailed with painful clarity Isabella's emotional cruelty throughout their marriage, her constant manipulation of their son, and her open contempt for Felicia. He spoke of how Isabella had tried to bar Felicia from his room, how she had dismissed his doctors and tried to bring in her own specialists who would declare him incompetent. "But the most important evidence," Arthur's voice continued, "is not my words, but hers. Last week, she did not know I had my lawyer install a small recording device in this room, activated by voice. She came in, believing me to be asleep to speak with Thomas. They thought they were alone. The recording is on this device. The key is to my old safe in the study. The evidence inside will corroborate everything." Felicia's blood ran cold. She stopped the recording, her heart pounding. She took the small antique key, went to the study, and opened the safe she never knew existed, hidden behind a false panel of books. Inside was a folder. It contained copies of emails between Isabella and a private investigator she had hired to dig up dirt on Felicia a year ago. It contained financial records showing large payments to the disgruntled nurse. And it contained a second audio recorder. With a deep breath, she pressed play. This time the voices were clearer. It was Isabella and Thomas in Arthur's room, thinking he was sedated and unconscious. Isabella's voice was sharp, cutting. "You have to divorce her the moment he's gone, Thomas. Not a day later. Offer her a pittance. Humiliate her. Make her crawl back to whatever hovel she came from. We cannot have that common bloodline infecting this family." Then Thomas's voice, weak and compliant. "And the baby? What do I do about the baby?" "The baby is a non-issue," Isabella had replied coldly. "We'll claim she trapped you. We'll claim it might not even be yours. We will drag her through a custody battle that will break her. In the end, she'll give it all up just to have peace. The Braddock legacy will remain pure. Your father in his senile state may be fond of her, but we will protect our family from his sentimentality." Felicia sank into a chair, the audio recorder slipping from her fingers. It wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a confession. They had laid out their entire vicious plan in the presence of the very man whose legacy they sought to protect. She now held more than just a defense. She held a weapon of annihilation. The hearing was tomorrow, and she knew exactly what she was going to do. The morning of the hearing was grey and overcast. Isabella Braddock arrived looking imperious and confident, her paid star witness, Nurse Brenda, trailing in her wake. Thomas followed, looking haggard, a man caught in an inescapable vice. Felicia entered last, calm and composed, carrying a simple leather briefcase. Isabella's lawyer, Fletcher, called his witness. Nurse Brenda took the stand and delivered a tearful, practiced performance, painting Felicia as a cunning manipulator who had poisoned a dying, vulnerable Arthur against his loving family. She would whisper insults about Mrs. Braddock and Thomas for hours, the nurse claimed, dabbing a fake tear. She twisted his every thought. It was heartbreaking. When it was Maria Davies's turn, she approached the stand with lethal calm. "Nurse Brenda," she began, "aside from your salary, were you paid any other amounts by Isabella Braddock? Specifically, a sum of $250,000 transferred to an offshore account 2 days after Arthur Braddock's death." The nurse's face went white. Fletcher shot to his feet, shouting objections, but Judge Albright overruled him instantly. "Answer the question, Nurse Brenda." The witness stammered, her lies collapsing under the weight of a single damning question. But this was only the opening salvo. At a nod from Maria, Felicia stood the proud swell of her pregnancy, a silent testament to everything at stake. "Your Honor," Felicia said, her voice ringing with newfound strength, "I would like to present new evidence that will clarify the true nature of the influence surrounding Arthur Braddock in his final days." She opened her briefcase and removed a small audio recorder. "This is a recording made by my father-in-law himself. He left it for me in the event of this exact scenario." She pressed play. Arthur's weak, rasping voice filled the stunned courtroom. He spoke of his faith in Felicia's character and his deep disappointment in his son and wife. A visible shockwave went through the room when he mentioned a second recording, one he had secretly made, of Isabella and Thomas. Isabella's face contorted a mask of dawning horror. "And now," Felicia said, her voice cold as steel, as she held up the second device, the conversation Arthur spoke of, recorded in his room when they believed he was unconscious. She pressed play again. The courtroom was plunged into a chilling silence, broken only by the recorded voices of mother and son plotting Felicia's destruction. Isabella's voice, crisp and cruel. "You have to divorce her the moment he's gone. Humiliate her. Make her crawl. We cannot have that common bloodline infecting this family." Then Thomas, weak and complicit. "And the baby? What do I do about the baby?" And the final monstrous words from Isabella. "The baby is a non-issue. We'll claim it might not even be yours. We will drag her through a custody battle that will break her." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute and condemning. Isabella was frozen in her chair, her face a grotesque tableau of public exposure and private ruin. Thomas had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. His lawyer sat down, utterly defeated. Judge Albright stared at Isabella, his face a mask of cold fury. "Mrs. Braddock," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. What you have just heard in your own words is a monstrous conspiracy to commit perjury and destroy an innocent woman. And you, he said, turning his glare on Thomas, your cowardice is contemptible. He slammed his gavel, the sound like a gunshot. The challenge to this will is dismissed with extreme prejudice. I am fining Mrs. Isabella Braddock $500,000 for malicious prosecution. And I am forwarding this audio evidence to the district attorney's office for investigation into potential criminal charges. His expression softened only when he looked at Felicia. Mrs. Braddock, you have endured a trial by fire and proven your father-in-law's faith in you was not misplaced. You are free. It was over. Complete victory. As the court adjourned, Thomas finally lifted his head, his face ravaged by tears. He looked at Felicia, his eyes a bottomless well of self-loathing, knowing no words could ever bridge the chasm he had created. Felicia met his gaze not with triumph, but with a quiet, somber finality. She gave a single nod, an acknowledgement of the tragedy he had authored, then turned and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. 2 weeks later, Felicia gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him Arthur. The day she brought him home, the mansion felt different. Isabella was gone, having retreated to await the results of the DA's investigation. Thomas remained a ghost in the guest wing. Felicia stood in the grand foyer, holding her tiny son. She looked up at the portrait of the first Arthur Braddock, then at the empty, faded space on the wall where Isabella's portrait used to hang. The house was no longer a cage or a battlefield. It was a sanctuary. It was home. Her son Arthur Vale Braddock cooed in his sleep, his tiny hand wrapped securely around her finger. He was not a mistake. He was a legacy. And she was his guardian. The past was a story of pain, but the future was hers to write. From courtroom humiliation to the head of an empire, Felicia Braddock's journey is a breathtaking saga of karmic justice. A husband's cruelty sparked his own downfall, but a father's final act of love provided the ultimate checkmate. She didn't just win her freedom, she inherited a fortune and proved that true power comes from character, not just a name. If you were moved by Felicia's incredible triumph, hit that like button to show your support. Share this story of empowerment with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another video where justice is finally served.